welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I am ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, but not just any fantasy today. Today's a very exciting moment for us because we get to complete a trilogy. Completed a trilogy for this author for the first time. We are talking about Robin Hobb's Farseer Trilogy, and today we are here to talk about the third and final book in that trilogy, Assassin's Quest.
That's exactly what we're here to do, Charles, and this is long coming for me. This is my first time finishing this trilogy by Robin Hobb. Not my first time starting this trilogy, but my first time finishing it. Over a decade ago. I gave it the old college try, quite literally, because I was in college at the time, I believe. And this time I, long graduated from college. I have
no longer frat bro, Dylan.
I think no. Yeah, I don't know if I was ever quite frat bro Dylan, but
you were in a fraternity though, which
makes
you a frat bro.
Frat bro's more of a state of mind. It's
there is an
and a set of
archetype.
Behaviors.
There is an archetype to frat bro that you don't embody, but it's still funny to call you a frat bro and think of frat bro Dylan attempting to read Robin Hobb's Farseer Trilogy.
So you're like, yo, dude, where the dragons at? Which,
nothing's happening in this book. In Game of Thrones, they were having sex every 5 minutes.
Very fair, very fair. So,
all the frat bros now trying to see Oppenheimer, and they're like, "Where's all the action, dude? This movie stinks." And then they leave.
That was your personal experience going to the theater, not necessarily a general trope that everyone can relate to, Charles.
I did see real frat bros at Oppenheimer, and that was their exact criticism. They fell asleep. They said it was boring.
And that's one of the main criticisms that people sling the way of the Farseer Trilogy.
It is.
But now that we're older and we've matured, Charles, we can see the value in this slow burn fantasy trilogy. And there's a lot of payoff in this third and final installment of at least this trilogy. I know the Realm of the Elderlings has a whole lot more to offer. But
It does. There's 10 more books or something. There's 3 or 4 more books within it. It is. I'm super excited to get your full opinion now that you've completed it, because we haven't talked about the ending yet. And this is, like you said, is a long time coming. I'm really interested to hear your perspective, particularly as someone that had given this series a chance long ago and has finished it now, how that perception may have changed, or if there's anything you kind of noticed or appreciated. Because to me, I'm so excited that we're here at the end, because I enjoy this book quite a lot. The reviews on Goodreads are kind of all over the place. Lots of 2s and lots of 5-star reviews. And so it just makes it fun to talk about, because I think within both realms of love it or hate it, there's valid points in both. But for some reason, for me, it all just comes out to a really great, different, original, interesting book that has come to realize influenced a lot of our favorite books today. We talked a lot about how we can see the connection to Patrick Rothfuss in our earlier episodes, and even now, right before we started recording, we couldn't help ourselves and chatted a little bit, and we were kind of talking about how there may be some sort of thematic connections to stuff in Grimdark, and even someone like Joe Abercrombie, who we love so much. So that's something I really enjoyed about this book too, just realizing wow, a lot of stuff I like about this book is what makes a lot of current mainstream super popular fantasy books my favorites today. There's a lot that's there, and it all kind of started in modern fantasy with a series like this and Robin Hobb. So I'm super excited to get into it. But before we get any further, there's going to be a lot of spoilers for the Farseer Trilogy. And Dylan, I think it's only right that you give one of your famous spoiler warnings.
Gladly, Charles. So this is going to be a no-holds-barred conversation of the entire first Farseer trilogy here. It means that Assassin's Apprentice, Royal Assassin, and Assassin's Quest, those are all fair game for spoilers from here on out. Neither of us have read anything else in the Realm of the Elderlings trilogies, or Realm of the Elderlings world. So you don't have to worry about any of that. But if you haven't yet read the Farseer Trilogy and you don't want anything spoiled for you, now's a good time to turn this down in your headphones, catch up to where we're at, and then come back for a listen of this deep dive.
Well said, Dylan. We are now into full-on spoiler territory. It's hard not to jump all the way to the end, but we've waited so long, and I feel like I just have to know, what are your kind of first reactions to having completed this series? What did you think?
Well, I think that it was worth it to read all of it. And I think once you've read this final installment, it's a long book. And I would say it remains relatively slow. I would say that the second book was the book that felt the most action-packed, is probably generous, but it felt like it had the most action and the most stuff going on. Even this one, despite the length, felt a little bit more slow and felt a little bit more along the pace of the first book, Assassin's Apprentice. But all of that ends up worth it because by the end you care so much about these characters. You care about how it pans out. You know Fitz so well. And Robin Hobb pulls no punches with how she decides to finish this novel. So I credit her for that. I think that though the book, you wouldn't classify it as grimdark exactly. As you were mentioning before, you see how some of the aspects of failure and hopelessness that are explored here are feel like predecessors to grimdark, and it leaves you really floored. And I think floored in a way that maybe we'd be entirely unprepared for in 1997 if we were reading this when this first came out, because you have to think now we've read a lot of trilogies and grimdark trilogies, and they're characterized by this, like, a lot of times ending that is purposefully not necessarily unsatisfying, but it's hard to find the right word, like purposefully a gut punch and reminding the reader that things don't always get wrapped up nicely in a neat bow. And I think that Hobb, while it's very conclusive, it's also very real in the sense that there's a lot of prices to be paid. And even the characters that come out, let's say, alive, they come out far from physically and psychologically unscathed, because I mean, even you look at Fitz, and you knew he was going to come out alive, but he's he's kind of living this resigned, humble life that
this hermit lifestyle.
Yeah, is kind of, it's sad. Like, he seems, I guess, happier than when he was actually involved in all of this mayhem and scheming and life-threatening stuff. But it's like, oh wow, this is our hero. And it's not like, it doesn't have the feeling of, I won't give away anything that happens at the end of, big fantasy trilogies, like maybe one written by Tolkien, because it's possible you don't know that, even if you're going to
spoil Tolkien.
Yeah, but let's just say there are some big fantasy trilogies that involve quests where the hero comes back and they get this kind of humble life, but it's like, oh, they deserve and live out this humble life with their friends and family and people around them and all of that. But Fitz, he feels more like a broken shell of of what he was.
It's an interesting comparison.
He loses, yeah, he loses pretty much everyone he cares about and that cares about him. Some of whom think he's dead. Most of whom, I guess. One of whom is a dragon. And
Right.
yeah, it's hard to maintain a relationship with a dragon.
Yeah.
And yeah, then there's like Starling, who's also there, but
She's there
every once in a while. Yeah.
She pops in and out every once in a while. Make
Yeah.
sure he's all right. Yeah.
It's rough.
No,
You
it's
never want to.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The romance ends in absolute tragedy for
The
for Fitz.
romance, as the first time reading the series, just caught me completely off guard, and it broke my heart originally, like for Fitz to have to go through what he went through, and then the second time you're like, this is actually kind of interesting. This is something that she weaved into the narrative from the very beginning of this book, and I actually highlighted a lot of stuff in the beginning of the book where she very cleverly weaves in like the way Birch reacts to some of Fitz's comments about Molly, where like he's been seeing her that whole time and is like not telling him, and he'll be like, oh, and then Birch turned away, or Birch was like startled and said, what did you say? Like, you know, like those kind of things she did a whole bunch of times in the beginning, and it was super interesting in the reread to see some of that worked in. But like you get to appreciate some of that more when you're not as distracted by just like the total blind side of this unexpected kind of blossoming romance between Molly and Burrich, and you feel conflicted about it in so many ways, and like we can dedicate a chunk of the episode to talking about it. But there was something that like it caught me so off guard, but it also was kind of this really interesting thing to happen to Fitz. Like the poor guy, like the only two people in the world really that you could consider his like loved ones and family, that they kind of get together and become happy without him is so weird, so bizarre, so heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's very bizarre and heartbreaking, as you say. I didn't really pick up on the bird stuff really with Molly and the like the foreshadowing of it that you're mentioning.
It was super
I did
subtle.
pick up on I did pick up on the stuff where I don't know, it Fitz is pretty much saying from the present narrative that he lost Molly. And maybe people take that to mean more in the short term when they're reading like the first book or the second book. But I mean, you can hear me saying on the first podcast episode that we did on this series, like in The Assassin's Apprentice, that I'm pretty sure. And I hadn't read the following two books yet. And I said, well, you know that this does not end well. Because there's literally moments where Fitz is like, well, like I did this and that may have been why I lost her. And I guess you could take that as like why he lost her in that one moment. But also I kind of assumed this is not going to end well. The fact that she ends up with his father figure... the guy who raised him.
Isn't that wild?
That I could not have seen coming until I saw it coming right when it was about to happen. And there was also a moment, I think it was Starling who said like, oh, so you've left your like quote unquote wife with this guy and he's taking care of her, and you say he's like really nice and a good man and treats women well and women like him, and Fitz is like, yeah, and she's like, yeah, she's like, you might want to keep an eye on that. Like, you might want to watch out. And Fitz
Seriously.
is like, no. And so that does kind of put the seed it's good foreshadowing, if you want to call it that. It does put the seed in the reader's mind, but it's easy to do what Fitz is doing where it's like, but he's old.
Even in book 2, and they actually bring that up, like Fitz remembers the comment at the end, but back in book 2 where Molly's like, everyone, like, Birch is like a desirable guy. You could do worse than Birch.
Yeah.
And like, that was just kind of like she didn't necessarily already have plans to like enter a
No.
relationship with him at that time, nowhere close to it, but it's one of those things of like we're working this in and um starting it. And even in like I highlighted some of it when I read it because I was like, oh, I'm catching it. In chapter 2 of this book, where my probably one of my favorite scenes besides the ending is these beginning scenes in this cabin where Fitz is getting rehabilitated by Birch and Chade, and they're having these really heavy conversations about like, is Fitz better off like becoming a beast person or not, and what the difference is, and if was he better off dead, and like, I hate you, Burrich, and like, I hate you, Chade, and like like maybe we kind of messed you up, we regret what we did. But you know, that some really interesting stuff going on in this cabin. But one of the things that Fitz is like kind of thinking about Molly, he goes, I've thought of Molly often, do you know where she went? And then the Birch just, yes. And then it goes, when he said no more than that, I knew better than to ask. And then he goes, oh, I knew it was wise to let her go or whatever. I hope that she believes me dead. I hope that whoever she went to takes better care of her than I did. I hope he loves her as she deserves. There was a rustling of Birch's blankets. What do you mean? He asked guardedly. You know, like these kinds of things of like he already knew he was crossing the line a little bit. And it does that a couple of times throughout the book where he's like dancing around the conversation of Molly, and it's super interesting just to see her work that in. And she did that before. She does that before where she's not afraid to just really, really subtly just let a character do something honestly and not make it as like a foreshadowing moment, not necessarily trying to get the reader's attention, but putting it in anyway because it's what the kind of the character would naturally do, so that when the moment does come, you buy into it. You know, I do think that there's a world where Birch and Molly kind of wind up together. They have no one else. They're bonded and like they're sharing the similar loss of Fitz, and they seem like a good match. I mean, there's this age gap thing we could get into, but beyond that, they seem like a good
Dane
match for each other.
Cook-esque.
Yeah,
Feels like we have to keep talking about Dane Cook on this podcast, but I guess that's
we'll just
more
keep bringing
an
it
issue
up.
with the fantasy genre and with Dane Cook than it is with what topics we seek out.
Right. Oh, also, there's a line in chapter 5 when he first starts to skill out at night, and he's like, I thought of her and longed hopelessly after what had been between us. Some perverse fate brought me dreams of Burrich instead. Where it's like, oh, how weird that, like, I'm thinking about Molly and my skill dreams are of Burrich, you know? Like, it's kind of like these interesting... It's a vivid dream that made no sense. I sat across from him. He was sitting at a table by a fire, mending harness, as he often did of an evening. Mug of tea replaced his brandy, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, it was one of those things that's like, why did I dream of Birch? That was so weird. You know, it was like weaving it before Molly even enters the scene, you know? So, like, in that dream, it was just of Birch working on something. But he's clearly, like, in someone else's home, right? He's clearly in Molly's home. He's not drinking because Molly's there. You know, that kind of stuff. So, it's interesting what Robin Hobb decides to invest in this series, and that's why I wanted to read it on the show and have you finish it, because I feel like I need someone to talk to about this. And we've already been talking about it for 2 books now, but I feel like it kind of recontextualizes itself when you finish the whole series of like, here's someone who, like, when people pick up or seek out a fantasy book, there's typical things to expect of like, oh, good overcoming evil, saving the princess, like, you know, epic quests, that kind of stuff. And Hobb purposefully invests in everything else and lets that stuff play out in the background, or she'll yada yada it sometimes and stuff like that. And she just fully invests in Fitz, and he's a character that doesn't get any princess, doesn't overthrow any evil. He kind of does, but he doesn't come out like a hero or famous or even happy. And by investing in that for so long, there's the word I use all the time about it, it becomes intimate in a way that you just rarely get in a work of fiction. And that's just one of the things that when this relationship comes and you see this almost to Fitz, it's perverse to see like Molly and Birch like wind up in each other's arms, you know, and to see that happen, but know that they think you're dead and they're happy and together and you don't plan on going back into their lives anyway. And then you take all that pain and start to feed it into this dragon. You know, like, all this stuff is happening at the end and you're like, oh my gosh, like this is so intense and you don't know how to feel like, because you're on Fitz's perspective. You're like, oh my God, how could they ever get together? But they think he's dead, you know? And it's like, how could this stuff happen? This book is so slow. It's like, well, we're in it with Fitz this whole time. And this book is like 700 pages. It is long. And maybe parts of it, you could argue the pacing could be brought up. But by making it long, it's, again, I always say that word, this is investment that Robin Hobb puts in to create this reading experience that I just don't think you can get with many other fantasy books.
That's all very well said, Charles. She invests in the character study of Fitz and his relationships above all else. And then to see these two people with whom Fitz arguably, but I would say likely, has the closest relationships with, so you understand them extremely well through the lens of Fitz's relationship with them. To see them end up together, but to see it happen in this very, like, strange but also semi-logical way that it plays out. Like,
right.
It makes sense, but also
right.
it shouldn't. But it does. Like, and I don't know. The age gap is obviously the weird part about it. But other than that
times,
aspect,
man. She's
wanted
wanted to be killed, and this is like the only person in the world that can help you. And also, he's just a nice guy, and he's nurturing, and
they always are, Charles. They always are.
It's those nice guys you got to worry about, man.
Right? Yeah. It's so, Charles, as a person who has read through this a second time, how long do you think Birch been scheming? Like, how long has he been scheming?
I think, even the second chapter of this book is telling, where he's not forthcoming with, oh, I went and saw Molly, we hung out, I was working on some leather straps on the floor, drinking tea at her place just the other day. She's good. He's very guarded. He's very hesitant to share what he's saying. And to me, part of that is because at some level he knows that he likes Molly in some way. Maybe he won't acknowledge it. Maybe he thinks he's doing the right thing. But that's always been Birch's MO, to be kind of withdrawn in terms of how he nurtures Fitz. And that's kind of ironic. He goes on to be like this great parent for Nettle. It's like, what? This was the kid you had sleep in the hay with the dogs when he first came to you. But I think he's been scheming unknowingly since chapter 2. I think he's of this book. I think he's been invested in what's going on. And then once he thinks Fitz is truly dead, which was kind of an interesting twist by Hobb to like have them think that he's truly dead. It was like, okay, well, at this point, this is all I've got in the world, there's no one else. So then he's kind of latched on at that point. And I genuinely don't think he is aware of it for a while. Like, it takes a long time for him to see this as a possibility, but that's just Birch. He's, old dogs, hard to teach him new tricks and get him to, make the first move. It takes like an attack and a swarm of bees to really make you see your infatuation with someone else.
Ain't that the truth?
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah, he kind of is like, oh, we could get married and then that would be helpful, but you don't actually have to do anything. And she's like, well,
that's exactly what someone who wants to do something says.
Exactly.
It's the nice guy MO.
Yeah, classic nice guy move from her.
Classic.
Yeah, and Molly falls victim to it.
She does. She could do worse.
Maybe
I guess,
they'll she did say that someone could do worse than Burrich. And she will do no worse than Burrich, but also no better. I don't know. Maybe
Who
we'll
knows?
see what happens in the
Yeah, he's
in the
not
future
a
of
young
this
guy,
series.
Who knows?
Yeah, yeah.
There's a lot of books left.
There are a lot of books left, which makes all of this interesting. It's almost one of those where you're like, ooh, this ends so not well in the sense of anything good happening to Fitz, but it ends so well in terms
Right.
of just good writing that
Yeah,
it's one of those where you're almost like, ooh, do I even want to keep
I know.
going?
I've
Like, 'cause
always
then
just thought
it's
this
not
was a
over.
complete
And-
done story. The fact that there's more out there. And I mean, the last book only came out in 2013, only 10 years ago now. But I mean, it's like not that long ago, considering the first book was 1995. So
Yeah.
it's relatively recently. It was, oh no, wait, I lied. That was when there's a whole nother trilogy after 2013. So the last Realm of the Elderlings book was Assassin's Fate in 2017. So not
Wow.
that long ago,
Pretty
man.
recent.
That's recent. That's, but 6 years. So yeah, plenty of things to happen along the way. I know they all don't follow the Fitz story arc and all that, but I know some of them do. So who knows? Maybe Molly and Birch are a part of that somehow. I'm sure they are. How could they not be? But yeah, the other thing, speaking of perverse, what did you think about the body swapping, and then like the uncle swapping with the step nephew to use his body to have relations with his wife? Fitz's aunt, right? Like, I'm going to use your body to have relations with my wife, your aunt.
Well, it's not biological, like
No, that's true.
relationship there.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm not opposed to that on any sort of
It's
like
not
incestual
cheating
grounds.
because it's you swapped minds. Who cares what body it is?
Look, all the adults, all of them were adults, all of them were consenting.
That's
whatever
true.
they're getting up to.
But how
you know,
much could
more
Fitz
power to
really
them.
consent to that? Like he's talking about saving the world. He's talking about procreating, so his kid doesn't have to be put on the line of secession. Like, how much of a choice did he have, really? He idolizes his uncle, like Verity. How much, But I still
I think he was coerced.
I think he was going to agree to do it whether he wanted to or not, because that's just the kind of guy Fitz is. He does a lot of stuff he doesn't want to do.
Didn't Fitz didn't they do the reverse in book 2? Like Fitz had sex with Ketcherkin in Verity's body.
Oh,
right?
No, it was the wolf went into his body and he had sex with Molly. That happened. Maybe he skill dreamed.
Maybe, but I also think he
because there's one where Molly was like, "Ooh, you were so good last night," and he's like, "What are you talking about?" And the wolf was like, "Oh yeah." And you're like,
there's something
interesting.
in the second book, I think, where maybe I'm mistaking that, because
He may have had a skill dream where he was privy to it or
but I think
witnessing
he
it
was
or
kind of
something.
controlling the situation. He wasn't just watching. And then I think
there was some
Ketcherkin
meddling.
kind of had that reaction of wow, you had the you were like a younger man. It's not like the energy of young, because Verity's throughout this thing been aging well beyond his years, so she was
But also
impressed by
drinking
his-
the tea, which was, I thought, an interesting twist. The elder bark or whatever it's called, tea.
Yeah.
That gives you profound feelings of hopelessness is a symptom, and it makes you really weak, and no one actually uses it because it's super harmful. That was an interesting theme throughout this whole
isn't
thing.
it just bad for skill users in particular?
Right. It weakens your connection to the skill, and it also gives you feelings of hopelessness. That
Hmm.
was another thing, which I don't know if that's unique to skill users or not. It sounded like that's what everyone happens to anyone that drinks it, but the only people that were drinking it were people that were, bothered by using the skill. It's kind of interesting. This whole theme of lost knowledge or like just not really knowing how to skill or how to handle skill was an interesting one in this book. And like Kettle, what makes her interesting is that she's 200 years old. She knows a lot more about the skill, but she was cut off from it. So she has the knowledge, but she can't demonstrate anything. And she's not willing to share the information for a really long time. So one of the things that I was always intrigued by with this book, and it kind of goes along with these lines of failure, is like just how just like the passing of knowledge has failed. Like the society has failed to the extent that all the skill users, which used to be these royal coteries, could do all kinds of incredible things, and then like slowly they like the coterie, the skill master didn't train enough people, and then she got sick and gave it to this guy Galen, who was a horrible dude and wanted to work with Regal to overthrow the king and refused to teach anybody. And then you get these Verity and Regal people genuinely trying, and they just don't have the skills to do anything, and they're just like stumbling into this magic they don't know, and they're learning. It was an interesting development. I don't know, I feel like Robin Hobb here, she's such a fantastic writer. There's so much going on with these books. She could write like a thesis on all of these different themes that she's weaving in, but I find that lost knowledge piece to be particularly interesting, and with the creations of the dragons and how we perceive the wit and all these other things are
Right.
super interesting, the kind of biases in society.
Yeah, it seems like with the wit, we've talked about this some in previous episodes where the wit kind of panned out to have a greater effect on making Night Eyes more human, I would say, than
Hmm.
it did in turning Fitz more bestial, at least in terms of long term, like he did. What he ended up doing
Yeah.
was not typical wit.
At the end
When
of
he
book
like,
two, beginning of book
yeah,
three, he was pretty
yeah,
much, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
shared the
But it
body of an
didn't.
animal and needed to go through
Right, you're not.
reprogramming.
Yeah, you're not typically doing that when you're using the wit. Like it was at least like Birch made it sound like if Fitz kept using the wit just normally, then he would permanently turn into a beast. And nothing like that ever happened. But Night Eyes did start to develop more human like characteristics, start to do more planning for the future, all that kind
Right.
of stuff. So
Hmm.
it's interesting that a lot of those seem to be misconceptions that people hold about the wit.
Sure.
And yeah,
It's the way to make dragons come back to life, combining the skill and the wit. Like gave them the jump start to reanimate.
true. Yeah, it's an interesting reveal that the elderlings are dragons. I guess in my head I was thinking of them more likely to be like elves. Some sort of mysterious but humanoid type creatures. Maybe I wasn't paying close enough attention in the earlier books that my
Well,
brain went
no
there,
one
but
knew who the elderlings were. It was again lost. It's like not that distant of history that is just
yeah,
completely lost. Like the royalty, Shrewd, Verity, Chivalry, Regal, they had very limited understanding of their own history, which is kind of fascinating. And it all comes back to, again, at the end of the day, it was like it was all of over a dispute that was basically like, hey, like you guys were invading our lands, now we're going to invade your lands, and we don't even remember why, other than that we just hate you and we're going to do it. And it's that back and forth, and it was only the like overcoming those kind of biases that they were able to instigate change in the first place. I know that there's a message in there, and it's a clever one because Regal uses wit to like weaponizes perception of the wit to even get there was what was his name? Not Hans. Was it Hans Birch's the
I
kid
remember
who
you're
went on
talking
to
about,
become
yeah.
like the stable master after Burrich, where
Right.
he sees Fitz and he's just like, oh, he's witted, and runs off in terror. And then Fitz is like, we grew up
It's
together,
like,
man. Like,
bro.
what? Like, you're gonna be that superstitious and fearful of me off of like rumors? You know me. So, but he also thought he was dead and came back to life. Those kinds of things. But there's an interesting piece around like ignorance and just like biases that permeate this whole book. Like ignorance is such a huge part of this book. Like no one knows what's going on. Fitz has no idea what's going on, and they're just grasping at straws, and it ends up pretty much ruining poor Fitz's life. And he's only able to salvage what he can by, coming to peace with who he is and the things he can do, and surrounding himself with people that can accept him for that. And that's really the only way he carved out any kind of peace for himself.
Yeah. And it's a very interesting, the ignorance in terms of like ignorance of the wit as a concept, but also ignorance plays a big role in terms of why Burrich and Molly end up together. Ignorance
Oh
of the
yeah.
fact that Fitz is alive, like the decisions that we make without complete information. That's
Oh yeah. I mean,
that
Verity
runs
just
through.
running off to find the Elderlings and leaving his kingdom to
Yeah,
just completely collapse. The royalty not doing anything about the lack of coterie members. Like Shrew just basically let his son overthrow him and kill him in the last book, right? It's this whole like this blindsided view of what's happening, and it's like kind of the worst downfall of this society more than anything else. It's just like all this book makes you feel like, oh, all the things that could have been like these skill users could have been so powerful. Fitz could have been happy with Molly raising his kid. Like you start to realize all these, like Shrewd could have been alive. He could have had this nice relationship with Verity. Verity could have been in his young, healthy body still. Like all these things that could have been that just aren't because people let things fall to the wayside out of like bigotry and ignorance. There's something that speaks to me about that at a very human level of like, this is how society collapses on itself. One of the common critiques that I've read in my research leading up to this book, a lot of reviewers, they talk about Regal, and they talk about how, oh, he wasn't that great of a villain and his arc just kind of peters out. And to me, I'm like, Regal's like one of the most true to life villains you're ever gonna find. And it's like his superpower is just being like so selfish, and you could say ignorant too, but just so like, there's no way someone with any kind of conscience would do this, but he does it, and that's what makes him powerful and continue to be powerful. It's like he didn't think twice about leaking energy off of his dad, or betraying his brothers, or betraying the people that work for him, or just leaving the capital to go to his hometown to set up a new capital. Like these are things that a lot of people in power just do, and it's not like they're stronger and that's why they're in charge. Sometimes they're just can make these sociopathic choices, and that's what keeps them in charge and in power. It's this failing upwards kind of mentality, and it's super interesting to see all that play out in this book in a way I've never read before. I don't know.
yeah. Actually think that by the end of the trilogy, Regal is a great villain. I think that I might have said he's after Assassin's Apprentice, like I don't know what I did say on the episode, but I would be more open to the like he's very just straight up mustache twirling evil, and it makes him kind of one dimensional villain. I don't think I would say he's like a bad villain. Like we've seen bad villains before that are really, really one dimensional and boring even. And Regal is certainly not boring.
Right.
I think that it's by the end of it, especially where we get kind of this brief view into like Regal's psyche in this
Right.
book, and like Fitz is in his head, and just all his paranoia and the way
Mhm.
that he sees Fitz and the way that he thinks that like his mother was assassinated and they'd be coming for me next, like all of that kind of stuff. It's like, oh wow, like it must be torture being Regal.
Yeah. And the
Like,
drug
because
use and yeah.
yeah, like he is not having a good time of it, and he sees himself as just scraping by to survive somehow. And I think that's one of the things that can get lost when we're solely in Fitz's point of view. I think we
Mhm.
talked about in a previous episode that it's uh, like why can't other people see through Regal as easily as we the reader can? It's like, well, we the reader are
Are getting a
getting
very biased
only
lens of Regal. And yeah, we kind of
like
talked about it
yeah,
last time. And it's what makes stories like this and like the King Killer Chronicles and even certain chapters of Joe Abercrombie's work have these characters where you're in their perspective so convincingly that you see a character like Regal and you go, "Oh, this guy's obviously a bad. He's literally twirling his mustache every time he's on scene." But you're seeing that through the lens of someone that genuinely hates him. And there's this kind of, again, I'm going to say ignorance that Fitz has about a lot of people in his life, Molly included, but Regal too. He's got a huge blind spot for Regal, and that, oh, Regal's this spoiled child who just wants to, take the throne, and he's dumb enough to just kill people to do it. But what you don't see, that you kind of get clues in the first couple books that, Regal's like a super charming guy, very personable. People like him when they speak to him, even won over Ketchikan for a while. Um, but then you get to see his enterprising side. Like, there's things about Regal that we don't get the full scope of. Like, he was raised by a mother who was probably like coaching him to overthrow the family from the beginning, and she was, from context you get the sense that she was on drugs a lot and probably OD'd, and that definitely had an effect
yeah,
on Regal too. And then that one moment at the end that you brought up where Fitz goes through his skill wall and is in his brain, you see how like tortured he is. And it's so
yeah,
interesting to see like the perception of all these characters that we see is such a very narrow view of what is basically an adolescent kid, of all of these people in his life. And as he branches out, he sees how they have to live on without him, and it's super interesting to see that. And I agree with you, Regal was one of the more interesting ones.
for sure. I think that it's easy to just see Regal when you're in Fitz's perspective as like, why is this guy so freaking obsessed with like killing Fitz and taking the throne and all that kind of stuff? But it's really illuminated when
Yeah.
you get to see from his point of view.
And there's this
And
long thing of Fitz trying to kill Regal that goes on for a very long time in the middle of the book. But what's interesting about it is you get to see how like public perception is pretty positive of Regal. Like, people genuinely like what he's doing, and he just won over that. He just took control of the narrative, right? He was like, oh, Ketchikan like did all this horrible stuff, and so did Verity, and so did Fitz, and like he was very good at that, and he won over the whole kingdom basically. And he put those like gladiator arenas in, and all of these things to kind of win people over. So it's kind of interesting to see how Fitz has to kind of live in that. And we've seen a couple times where he's had to like adjust his view of the world and the people in his life, and they're always fascinating. Like, we got a lot of it with Molly in the last book, where it's like, what, do you think she's going to wait around forever? She like, this relationship could never work. Did you really like her as much as you thought, or she liked you more than you thought? Like, you're not the only one who gets to decide like how this relationship worked. It's kind of like what Night Eye said in book 1, something along the lines of, do you think that to bond or not to bond someone is your choice alone? Like, to bond someone is a mutual thing. And I think Fitz had a hard time learning that for so long. And it's interesting to get, when you get a book that's so committed to one perspective, you can kind of have those conversations. And the way Robin Hobb toys with that perception, and especially focusing on the fact that our main character is not one that's emotionally mature and can see these relationships as well as we think he can. And that kind of stuff always fascinates me. And we brought up the first law earlier. It kind of reminds me of why I like the way the first law is written for many characters, where you're so committed to a certain perspective that you can kind of be charmed into thinking the way they think and not even considering what else could be happening, like how else this situation could be interpreted, because the way you could interpret Fitz's actions in a whole lot of ways. Like, he just ran off for not a very good reason and abandoned his family, when he just could have turned around and come back, those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's interesting because you don't really think of Fitz as this, like, charismatic, misleading, unreliable narrator, which is, it's very easy to slot someone like Quoth into
right.
Quoth from the Kingkiller Chronicle by Patrick Rothfuss.
Mm-hmm.
He fits that like a glove, right? And
right.
I think that Fitz, the ways... So Quoth in the Kingkiller Chronicle, I assume the ways in which we're misled by him are like a little bit more, not even necessarily intentional, but a little bit more like Quoth twists his words and the narrative and all that kind of stuff. I would say it's kind of deliberate. But then there's Fitz, who he's unreliable because he's like just can't see things for
right.
the way they are. And
it's also like a twist on the coming of age, where it's like, oh, like someone like Harry Potter. Oh, I come of age when I realize that I'm better than I thought I was, and I can be really good. Whereas a lot of it's like coming of age is realizing you've been a jackass this whole time, and that you should maybe kind of rethink the way you treat people. It's interesting, different takes on coming of age.
Yeah, and there's like, does he ever really mature and like
Fitz?
Grow? I think
good question.
It's like, because you want to see like, oh, I experienced all this pain and that has shaped me into a better person. It's like, or I could just give it to the dragon. I could just let the dragon have all that, and then I don't have to grow from my pain and experiences. And everyone is like, Fitz, don't do that. Like, that's not a good idea. And he's like, I don't really want to.
I don't care. It hurts too much. Yeah. And you kind of feel for him. And I've always liked that part of the magic system of like this idea of you feed the dragon pretty much everything, which is what Fitz has kind of been doing his whole life, is like giving his life to the service of the crown, right? To his king. And then now you literally are pouring your memories, your emotions, everything into bringing this dragon to life. So when Fitz is experiencing this very real and complicated heartbreak, very complicated, like when your wife, air quotes, wife runs off with your dad, it's like, that's a hard thing to kind of come to terms with. It's just like, like when your wife leaves you is one thing, it leaves you for your dad is next level, and they both think you're daddy. So it's just a lot of stuff to work through there. And this idea of feeding it to the dragon, and it kind of comes to this idea of, and you made a great point, Dylan, when you said like, but does Fitz even learn his lesson? Not really. At the end, he lives as a recluse, as a hermit in the woods, and everyone's like, why are you doing this? You're not that old. You could live a life like in society, like do whatever life you want. He's like, no, I would prefer to be a bum. I'm fine. Trust me. I'm okay. This is the right thing for me. It's like, no, he didn't. Did he really come of age? Like, did he really learn that lesson? No. Like, look at where his situation. Like, he's locked himself up in a shack, and he has his I don't know what you call his relationship with the musician. What's her name? It's Starling.
Starling?
Starling has to literally come by and like drop him off food, and it's like, I brought you someone to live with you so you're not super crazy, and it's like, okay, like this is someone who may still have some learning to do in later installments. But it's an interesting question, like, as a coming of age novel, did this character like come of age? Like, what does that even mean? Maybe realizing that you're meant for mediocrity and you're not going to solve all your problems and you're just going to get old is part of coming of age.
Charles, is this a Bildungsroman?
I think it is a Bildungsroman.
A word that we learned together in like one of our first ever episodes.
It was
Bildungsroman.
The Wizard of Earthsea was when we learned that word.
Yeah. Yeah. A novel dealing with one person's formative years or spiritual education. Formative years, yes. Spiritual education?
No.
Not quite,
He doesn't,
I don't
Not
think.
quite. He hasn't
He goes
seen the
eternal
light.
sunshine of the spotless mind.
Yeah, that's more
Right?
accurate.
Like, that's basically giving it to the dragon. Like, just get rid of that. And that's
so true.
I don't know. There's no way to deal with it. So
No, you got to face your
I mean-
problems and come to terms with them, right, Dylan?
I like to think so. As, the therapist in me likes to think so. But it's
You wouldn't
it's
just
funny.
feed
We did
your most traumatic memories to the dragon or erase them eternal sunshine style.
well, we did. In my PhD program, we had a class that was like a more neuro-focused class, and they're like trying out these eternal sunshine style drugs apparently like in the real world that they are like, oh, if we give people they're very crude at this point, but maybe they're moving in the right direction here, or wrong direction, Charles. But yeah, they have these drugs that are sort of moving the direction toward eternal sunshine, like delete this memory style. Right. And it's like, oh, do these have applications in terms of trauma? Like, can we just get people to delete their trauma and then they're better? And like, we had to write an essay, like we're counseling. It's like PhD students, we had to write an essay. And it's like, well, then we're out of jobs. No, but it's actually like, would that be good or helpful? Like,
well, they say chasing the dragon is when you're doing drugs, and then you're feeding the dragon also, which is where you're giving up all your memories and experiences.
Well,
it's kind of
both expressions do include dragons, Charles. I don't know if
but
I don't know if you touched on anything.
They could both be relevant to a drug that erases your memories. Because you're both chasing and feeding the dragon in that case, and that is not a situation that you want to find yourself in if you can avoid it.
Yeah, I mean it's true though, but we learn there's post-traumatic growth. That's a very real thing that lots of people experience. And at what point, it's also, there's like psychological questions around if it would actually eliminate the traumatic reaction or just the memory of the trauma, which like memory is a key aspect of like you have to be able to recall it to do some of the empirically supported treatments for helping people with trauma.
Okay, so we get it. You're educated.
But either way, anyway, the choice to feed the dragon does not speak to growth, in my opinion.
And when it comes to that's actually very insightful. And even Kettle says it's not like just by trying to forget, you're still going to like be reminded of it. It's still going to affect you. But by feeding it, you're going to have a harder time facing it and coming to terms with it. Something like that was what she said. And you can tell by the end that he's not really quite there, like to terms with it. And that's the interesting part of this book is that focus on failure in so many ways. One of the main criticisms of this book is like, oh, nothing happens. This book is so sad. Like this character kind of is depressing. To me, it's a very, I'll say, I don't know if I want to say bold choice from Robin Hobb to dedicate so much time and skill and storytelling in a character who's ultimately like a tragic character, but I don't know, it allows to explore some of these themes in a way that like a happy ending just couldn't do sincerely. And there's something about reflecting on Fitz's suffering that brings up a lot of good questions. And I don't know, Dylan, I guess I wanted to get kind of your reaction on how you thought about this idea of failure and what it was like to read 3 not short books about a character who ultimately just fails his way through the whole book and meets all kinds of tragedy and isn't that like glorified hero that you come to expect from a lot of traditional fantasy. Did that take away from your reading experience? Did it take away some of the enjoyment of the reading experience?
Well, we're big Joe Abercrombie fans, and when
We
we
like to
chatted with
suffer.
him, he did say that he did his like undergrad thesis on the topic of human failure, which was unsurprising given some of the choices he makes with his writing. But yeah, as someone who's at this point read a lot of grimdark and stuff like that, I'm not afraid to enjoy some good old human failure, but. It's yeah, it's interesting, and especially in its context. We talked about what would it be like reading this in 1997 alongside, like, at that point, the still well ongoing Wheel of Time series, right? Which is I didn't end up finishing that yet, but, far from finishing it. But it's I have a feeling that's not going to be a treatise, right? What they call it, an examination of human failure in the end. But yeah, I just find it interesting. I think the choice is a thoughtful one and one that very few were making at that time, and I enjoyed it. It's interesting when you step back and think about, like, okay, well, what does happen at the end of this novel? It's like, well, the long lost king returns, and he's turned into a dragon, and he destroys all their enemies, and the bad guy who usurped the throne was killed, and that's the end. It's like, oh, well, that does sound like a heroic end to an epic fantasy novel that we've read a million times. But we don't get the perspective of Verity in that sense, and we instead get, the royal bastard who's just been strung along by all these events and ends a hermit who's miserable. Even, I don't know if he would describe himself that way, but he's
Definitely has not worked
like,
through a lot of his issues.
And his answer to all the ways in which he's been hurt by having actual relationships with other people is, I'm just not going to do that. I'm just not going to have relationships.
He did let Molly go, which you could consider growth, but yeah, sequestering yourself and yeah, exactly. Like, I'm alive.
He shows up and he's like, hey, I'm alive. Like, he smells terrible. Like, he's like a
that would really throw a monkey
self.
wrench into the relationship triangle of Burge, Fitz, and Molly for sure.
Yeah, but who knows? Maybe he'll do that in one of the future books.
It is kind of interesting how Fitz's whole thing at the beginning was like, oh, I never knew my dad, blah, blah, blah. And then he has his own kid and ends up never, being in the situation where they've never met. There is something in that I always found interesting. It's like talking about like learning, like if this was a different story, it'd be like, and then Fitz promised to, like, the story ends with Fitz sitting by the fire with his daughter in his lap, and he's like, I'll always be here for you, I'll never let you go, like the end. Like certain other books might end where you get to have like the family and love and a chance at normal life, and we don't get that. We're repeating the same mistakes. There's this cyclical, systematic nature about these royalty and these people who are fighting at the top of this politics level, where they just kind of sacrifice their relationships and their individuality and their sense of selves, quite literally feeding them to dragons so that they could fight enemies. And then that part where literally the dragons defeat the red ships is yada yada at the end. And some people criticize that. Like, how could you just rush the end? It's like, that's the point, people. Like, this whole
It's a
thing is that Fitz
fundamental
wasn't there.
misunderstanding of what the story is about. If
It's
you think
beautiful that she did that. It's
yeah.
like, yeah, go ahead, because you're totally right about it.
Yeah, it's just the story, that's the epic fantasy ending that we have nothing to do with by the end, because the story is and always has been a character study of Fitz. And this idea that we should get this miraculous ending where the king that turned into the dragon is defeating everyone and everyone's celebrating, and it's like he returns to it's like, that is all just stuff that happened as, because of Fitz's sacrifice in part anyway. But the result of Fitz making that sacrifice, that's the story, or the ending of the story. And it's the part we're not usually told. And if you want a dragon coming in and saving the day at the end of the novel, especially in 1997, like, that's every novel.
Lots of novels that do that, that give you that epic battle at the end, good versus evil, all these things. And like, you even kind of get the Red Ship Raiders, they're just presented as just chaotically evil people. They just are malicious for no reason. You find the reason is revenge from generations ago that the nation totally forgot they even did in the first place, which is kind of funny. And again, this all gets yada yada because it's not the focus. And it's kind of an interesting, beautiful part of the book where it's like, that stuff happened, and I'm telling you it happened, but Fitz was not there. That had nothing to do with how Fitz ended up being as an adult, like, he already paid the price of his life and his individuality to get to that point. And then while that's happening, he's off with Night Eyes, hiking, hunting, living in a shack. And that's what that story did to him, right? Like, these glory moments of like epic wartime and epic songs, like people that get to kind of reap all of that. Fitz gets to reap none of that. He like paid the price and didn't get any of the returns, essentially. And it's the kind of that tragedy of his character that is the whole point of the book. Like, this was never going to be a epic standoff, like Battle of the Five Armies, Last Stand. It was always going to be this thing that kind of petered out, and he's like, oh, I'm done, I guess. Am I better or worse? I don't know. Like, the end. And you're like, wow, what happened to this poor guy? And like that just kind of makes you think about just kind of the way society can work sometimes, and the way that things don't always work out all the time. It's an interesting thought to explore. And I don't know, Fitch is one of those really interesting characters in fantasy. He's not topping any charts of people's like favorite fantasy characters of all time, but he's up there in terms of most interesting, for sure.
Yeah, interesting. And but interesting more in terms of just what like the external things that happened to him, and how that beats him down and affects him more so than like as a person. I guess he's like almost got some like Harry Potter self-insert to him, but in the opposite
kind of
way. Like, what what if a relatively blank slate person that you could put yourself in the position of, instead of having everything, besides his parents getting killed in a I'm saying Potter, his parents got killed when he was too young to remember it. Got the badass lightning scar, and that was and some bad things happened to Potter. But in the end, it's like I won't spoil anything, but lots of good things happen to Harry Potter. And it's more inserting yourself into this narrative of the blank slate hero.
Yeah, it's whimsical, it's exciting, it's,
we get to be the hero if we're reading. And that's the point, or at least one of the reasons why that series is so massively successful, is because it's so easy to censor. And then it's like, it's very easy to self-insert into Fitz because, like, what are Fitz's characteristics?
Right.
Like, you can name a few just the same way you could with Potter, but they're not super strong in the way that you could say for, like, let's say Joe Abercrombie's Logan Nine Fingers, right? We could so easily, we've done entire episodes talking about his characteristics as a person. Or, Quoth, as we've mentioned, King Killer Chronicle, with his charisma and his ability to lie and his ability to act and how suave he is and blah, blah, blah. And is he making it all up? It's like, there's so many, his Fitz, like, he's a little bit brash sometimes.
He can be
he's
impulsive.
He's mostly passive.
Definitely.
And is passive a characteristic? Sure. But it's not exactly a hero's characteristic. It's not one that makes it hard to self-insert.
And he spends so much time doing stuff that he doesn't want to do, and like just following other people around, going on these missions that were asked of him, that he rarely gets the chance to develop his own personality. And it's like all the stuff that he likes to do, he's told not to do. It's like, oh, don't bond to an animal. Oh, don't chase Molly. Like, and all he wants, he never got the chance in part. But that, like you said, we find ourselves self-inserting, like unwillingly almost, through Hobbs's strategy of,
like, Fitz
I'm going to make you
sucked into a skill dream of Burrich. We're just
right. She skilled us into Fitz's brain is what it feels like.
Yeah.
It's through just beautiful, beautiful prose. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed, even when I was like, okay, what's happening is kind of going on for a long time, especially in the last book, which is longer than the other two books combined.
And doesn't have any more happening in it, and arguably less than book 2.
It does not. And so those things combined, I still was like fully on board at all time. I was just enjoying it because she's an incredible, incredible writer. And it's like you said, Dylan, she skilled us into Fitz's mind, and it's like we are Fitz experiencing those things in some way. And she creates this character in such a way that self-insert does kind of, that effect creeps its way into the reading experience. There's not like, what is the personality traits? Like, what zodiac sign is Fitz? Total Aries. It's like he's nothing. He's whatever you are interpreting it to be.
You know what Harry Potter house he is? Hufflepuff.
Oh, 100% Hufflepuff. He'd be like, oh, I'm Gryffindor. It's like, come on, bro. I don't think so. Everyone wants to be Gryffindor, not you.
There's like, now everyone's so obsessed with those Harry Potter houses that, like, there's a lot more Hufflepuff pride than there was.
Hufflepuff is having a resurgence. I've noticed that too, now that you've said it. And I'm like, why are people like simping for Hufflepuff right now? Like, they are the everyone else. They're the normies in the magical world. To be normal in a world where magic exists, that is Hufflepuff. Okay? Yeah, Gryffindor is obviously the best. There's always people that were like coping and saying they'd be in Ravenclaw. And I'm just like, hey, guys, come on. Slytherin and Gryffindor are the only houses worth being.
I wouldn't want to be in Slytherin.
Yeah, you don't really
I think
want
I would when I think Harry Potter, like, school Harry Potter house tests are silly. Worked out personality.
What's so silly about the sorting hat?
There's a part of there's a part of me that's like, this is setting psychology back. But there's also the part of me that's like, this is good old-fashioned, just silly fun. And when I've taken them, I always get Ravenclaw, and I do think that I would be Ravenclaw. Like, that's, it is the house that's, like, more academic. I'm not coping. This isn't copium here. It's the more, like, academic house, and that's where my life has kind of gone.
Have fun, and then I'm going to be with the popular kids in Gryffindor. I guess Verity could probably be a Gryffindor, but he's leaning for Hufflepuff.
You're a
for
Slytherin.
Me too. Slytherin? How could you say that about your own lifelong friend and co-host?
Because I've known him for my entire life.
What would make
That's
me
how I can say
Slytherin?
it.
Regal is Slytherin. Your
Yeah,
boy.
but they're not. You see, there's also this like Slytherin resurgence where people are like, Slytherins aren't bad, they're just ambitious.
They're the
Like,
most likely
they're.
to call for a Holocaust and this other kind of craziness, but that doesn't mean they're all bad.
So there's.
Just
Yeah.
every single
Anyway,
person from Voldemort's little sphere is all Slytherin, but you know what?
yeah.
That has nothing to do
They're
with
not
the
all bad.
house.
There are plenty. Yeah.
But Fitz
Not
Hufflepuff.
all Slytherin. Hashtag not all.
There's good people in every house, okay?
Yeah. So, there's that. But yeah, anyway, we are we are kind of
bringing
it's
it
like
back.
bring it back to Fitz. Like it's like the anti Harry Potter. It's like you get to really put yourself in a relatively blank slate character who everything bad happens to and ends up a sad recluse. Like, did you like my book? And amazingly, most people do. Like
Yeah,
sometimes
that's the
critics
amazing
are
part.
louder than the critics can be louder at times than the fans, but it's a hugely popular series,
Yeah.
and Assassin's Quest on Goodreads has a 4.2 average rating. So sure, when you read the reviews, you'll find plenty of people who are mad that we didn't get more dragons.
Right.
But the
It's got
average person who reads this
150,000
is
reviews too, which is pretty
Yeah.
high. So
150,000 ratings,
yeah, ratings. That's right.
7,500 reviews.
That's right. That's
Sorry.
correct.
Yeah, but
For a third
it's
book,
a
that's pretty
hugely
good.
popular series. For a third book, that's fantastic, and it's obvious to anyone who's familiar with the big fantasy authors that Hobb has established herself among the biggest living fantasy authors. So
Like Hero.
it's
Oh yeah. Okay. So there's a
it's
lot.
like a
But
King Killer in that way too, right? Like King Killer, it's like these books have ridiculously high average ratings on
Mhm.
Goodreads or Amazon, wherever you want to go. They sell 1 million copies, and then it's like anywhere you go online, it feels like you just have people just reaming the books, and it's like I don't know, for some reason
But the
certain
percentage of
series
people
just
that leave reviews is like 1% of the
right.
like 1 to 10% of the like total audience that's experiencing these books, right? And
Yeah.
you're more likely, if you have a strong opinion, whether it's good or bad, to leave a review as well. So they're never perfect. I do think that like there's pretty consistent comments about this book and about the series as a whole. And like we've talked to other friends in the fantasy creator community, and it's not uncommon for the Farseer trilogy to catch some strays, as they say, catch a little slack in some of the community for being boring or to being like Fitz is not a good character and all these other things. And I think that was like Hobbs knew the risk she was taking and took it anyway for the sake of artistic integrity. And the fact that she's able to make these like some of the most influential works of modern fantasy and one of the classics, like modern classics now for sure, is for a character that's super unlikable in a story that's not super unlikable for like an unusual main character and like a more tragic story, a more slower paced, meditative, introspective story. Bold choices, hard to succeed. It's like so much easier to write a story with lots of sex and blood and guts and like, Game of Thrones, for example. Like those characters are doing crazy ass violent stuff, crazy ass sexual stuff all the time. Like Court of Thorns and Roses, super sexual, like it's action packed stuff going on.
Fitz is willing to get down with some body switching sex.
Fitz is
so-
into some freaky stuff. No judgment. I mean, hey, it's an interesting dynamic that he creates with the skill for sure. Brings in a whole level to relationships that I had never considered before or since. But yeah, it's definitely those ideas to me that they have stuck with me for so long. You know, we've read hundreds of fantasy books, but the ending of like Molly and Birch getting together and the body swapping to procreate a royal heir and all that other stuff, it just sticks with me. It's so unique and original, and just that stuff like that just catches my attention and sticks to my memory just so much better than just the run-of-the-mill kind of fantasy. And I applaud Robin Hobb for it. It's not easy to come up with like these crazy original thoughts that are as layered as hers are. And I think that's one of the main reasons why these stories are just so successful.
For sure. The Fitz character stuff makes me think about, we talked about this before, Brandon Sanderson has this slider model for character development, like how you make an interesting character. You know, Sanderson loves turning these things into
he gamifies the whole process. Yeah.
So, and it's hard to argue with his success.
Oh, 100%. He knows what he's talking about.
They're very thoughtful. Sometimes you can't, sometimes what makes a character work is more ineffable than breaking it down into sliders like this. And in some ways that is Fitz, which is what's very impressive in what Robin Hobb does, because basically to write like a quote unquote good character, a character people like in the sense that they like reading about them, or would say this is my favorite character, even if they're not like a nice person. Right. He has these three sliders. There's sympathy, which is just that straightforward, like, is this character likable? Like, if you make them more likable, that usually helps. But then there's competence. Is this character good at what he or she does, or what they do? And proactivity. To what extent is this character driving the plot? In other words, how much do they, quote unquote, protag? And it's like, we've used this to discuss, let's say, friend of the show, Mark Lawrence has Prince of Thorns as a series where it's like you can turn the sympathy all the way down if you want. Like, you can make this character not likable at all. But if you do what Mark Lawrence does with Jorg, and you make competence very high, and you make proactivity all the way jacked up to the top, then we actually have an interesting character that even though you've got all the way at the bottom with their likability, people still are like, oh, Jorg is a great character.
Yeah, he's a great character.
He is a great character.
For those exact reasons. But what the answer to Fitz is like, it's complicated.
Well, that's the thing, is like, sympathy, like, is this character likable? Not super
it's complicated.
Low. Nothing like Jorg. Not super high either. Like, let's give him around the middle. Competence.
I'd say he's maybe a little more off, like 60% on the likable, just like that slight bump towards likable.
Let's give him the 60%. Sure. Competence? Are they good at what they do? Not really. Like,
he has a lot of natural abilities, but they never, like, there's either taken advantage of or cut off or suppressed,
like,
or squandered.
He could have been good at the skill, maybe, but he doesn't end up because of the ways in which it's blocked, and he's not trained, so like, he's not really good at the skill. He's, I guess, good at the wit for whatever that's worth. He's kind of a good fighter, but
he's
it's
good
like,
at rowing. He's
good at rowing. Yeah, I know you value that as a former member of our high
I do
school
appreciate
crew
a good
team,
rowing
but-
scene.
Right, but it's
Underrated.
Like, I don't know. Generally speaking, I would say Fitz is not particularly competent at most of the things that
he does pretty much fail at everything he sets out to do.
So I would say no. And then proactivity is like super low. Because it's to what extent is this character driving the plot? It's like the
plot's driving
what they
him.
say, like the tails wagging the dog with right, whatever they say there.
Right,
like, that is Fitz. Like, the plot drives Fitz, and not vice versa.
But at the same time, he's so crucial to the plot, right? And meanwhile, like, he's the one that figures out how to turn on all the dragons. That's my 21st century brain, just took the technology.
Flip the switch.
Yeah, just flipped the reboot them.
Yeah.
But he's not exactly proficient in any one skill, and everyone keeps berating him for how clueless he is all the time.
Right. So
but
anyway,
he is able
the
to
point
do
I'm trying to make
things.
is like Brandon Sanderson, massively successful author. He uses these tools all the time, and it's been with almost every character that I've tried to put this into. I'm like, oh, this pretty much works. Like, let's say, like, Quoth, kind of lower on the sympathy, but higher on the other two. Like, there's other characters that are higher on the sympathy, but are lower on the other two that we still like. It's like, I don't know.
Glocta, for example, he's a torturer, but he's funny and endearing and capable, like those kind of things.
Abercrombie does a lot of lower on likability and higher on other things.
Yeah,
or like why so many people don't like Jazal in the first Law series, because he's actually like pretty low on just about all of them except maybe competence at like his particular skill set of sword fighting in a very particular kind of duel. Like, so then people, he's low on sympathy, he's low on proactivity, and he's kind of, he's competent at one particular thing. So people don't like him, even though he's not nearly as bad a person as the guy torturing people for a living. So it's like, you look at most characters and they, I don't know, they just, like, you can find why they are received in the way they're received based on these sliders. Fitz does not fit.
I was just about to say that. Yeah. He doesn't fit the bill.
No, it's like, I don't know how to explain Fitz in reference to these things, and I don't know why people react to Fitz in the way that they do in reference to those sliders. It's like, he's such a unique and different character, and it's such a close examination of his psyche.
Robin Hobb's created a story that exists outside of all of that stuff. It's like she took the Sanderson 101 course and was like, cool, now I'm not going to do I'm going to break all of those rules in my story because my story is...
the Sanderson rules came way later.
Right.
Sanderson was a boy reading Wheel of Time when she published the first book.
Right. But, these are arguably things that he kind of academicized, he caught on to. Like, these are standard fantasy things that Hobb was, reading Lord of the Rings, and, there's all this other stuff that came out around it. And she's just like, nah. What we need to do is, like, write a really intimate story about one person and really push the limits of, like, put a real lens on society and put a real lens on humanity's struggles. And let's try and come to terms with that, And she makes a really fantastic effort at it. And I think one of the main reasons she succeeds, she doesn't offer a whole lot in terms of solutions. She offers a whole lot in terms of, like, here's what happened. Here's the very honest perspective. Here it is in all its complicated, messy glory. See you next time. And, like, that's kind of and you're like,
see
what?
You for the Tawny Man trilogy.
And you're like, what? But it's important because to come up with an answer is almost a disservice to what she's trying to say, which is that there is no answer. And sure, fantasy is an escape, and can be an escape, and a lot of different stories are escapes for people. But this is fantasy that's not an escape. This is fantasy that's trying to grapple with all the ugliness around humanity and society, and it willingly grapples with it and pulls nothing back and faces it all. I mean, we're talking about your pregnant significant other giving birth and then leaving you for your dad. You're the person that raised you like a dad. You're not, it's like, this is what we're talking about here. This is wild stuff.
When you're talking about fantasy as escapism and how this relates to it, it's like, that corny thing people say, like, I need a vacation from my vacation. It's like, I need a fantasy from my fantasy. Like, you need a fantasy book to escape from the fantasy of being a person reading Robin Hobb.
I know.
It's
I need just a puff piece to just destroy, like a
Whoa, that
classic.
is, do not say puff piece. That is a slur for Hufflepuffs.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
How I'm so
That was
sorry. I'm from another
before.
time. I didn't know.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to correct myself. So please, all you new Hufflepuff people out there who all of a sudden came out of the woodwork over these past decade or so, please forgive me. I come from a time where it was like it was not accepted socially to be Hufflepuff,
To be a
and you had to hide that part of
Pretend to be
yourself and
Gryffindor.
repress it. Yeah. So some things are just in my vernacular as part of the time period I grew up in. I'm consciously making the effort to change. So I hope you can forgive me, all you Hufflepuffers out there.
Whoa. Just say Huffle. All you people belonging to the House of Hufflepuff.
Okay, all you
He's
people
working on it.
belonging
He's
to the
working
House
on
of
it.
Hufflepuff.
He's working
Thank you for educating me. Even though you're not
I
a
mean-
member of that house, you're a total Ravenclaw, so I don't even know what gives you the authority to lecture me. But
Well,
that's
isn't that just so Ravenclaw, right?
yeah, exactly. But all right, I mean, we've pretty much talked a whole lot about this book. I guess all that's left to do here is kind of just your parting words. This is our first Robin Hobb trilogy coming to a close. How you feeling? Where do you sit with Robin Hobb? Would you read on in the future? Where are you standing here?
Yeah, 2 thumbs up to Hobb and to this trilogy. I really enjoyed it. I think it was time that I finally read the whole trilogy and can say I've read a full Robin Hobb trilogy. Participate in that discussion, because it was one of those. We all have some holes in our books that we've read that we're like, why have I not read this? We just continue to not read it, and this was one of them. So I would say, yeah, I'm glad I did. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I do want to keep going eventually with these books. There is a part of me that's like, oh, but this was such a good conclusion. I'm trying to think what that like.
Yeah.
It's like when they
How you pick that back up.
yeah, when they like revamp an old series after it's already done, but it actually
Right.
like I'm not thinking, because there's some series that end like I don't know. Let's say like Scrubs. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, because I actually had like a really good finale, and then they're like Scrubs Med School, and it's like, oh no, you're ruining it. Like,
and then the characters come
So-
back and you're like, this is just perverse. I don't want to see
Yeah.
them in this setting. Like, what is going on?
Right.
No one wanted this.
And-
You ended it right. You know
Yeah.
how hard it is to end a series in a way that makes most people happy? It's borderline impossible.
Yeah, it's very difficult. So I would say I have so much faith in Hobbs' writing. In no way do I expect that the Tawny Man trilogy would be the Scrubs Med School of the
right.
realm of the Elderlings world.
Right.
But it does have that feeling where like, do I want to disturb something that feels very whole and
Mess with a good thing,
like
you know?
done so well? And the answer will eventually be yes. But right now it's gonna be let's sit on this for a little while.
Right.
And
I feel you. That vacation from a vacation. Like, I ended that book being like, Robin Hobb is like one of the best writers in the game. I'm definitely
yeah.
reading the rest. At the time when I first read it, maybe like a long time ago, I loved it, and I was ready to just continue to crank through that TBR pile. Now that we've read so many of the like most famous works of fantasy, I'm ready to like dive more into it. But I think that break to take in some other authors' work, and then I'll be just itching to come back to this in the very near future. I feel like, because I feel like she's only just getting started, and this is her earliest works. So you got to imagine that as she progresses, like she's been writing this over the course of nearly 30 years. So there's a lot to grow and change with this world that I'm looking forward to getting into. But, in the meantime, you got a lot of other fantasy to read. We're going to jump back into the Court of Thorns and Roses series. We're going to have to do another Friends Pitching Fantasy very soon, since we've met our reading commitments already for that, and we need new stuff to read. So you can expect that in the near future. And in the really near future, I think you can expect that sweet, sweet outro music. What do you say, Dylan?
You know what else was really bad was Zoolander 2. Like when they
Anchorman 2.
revamped, and that, what's funny? I thought that was terrible. Did we see that together?
Yes, we did.
Yeah, we saw that terrible. We thought it was really bad, and it actually got like decent reviews. I mean, I stand by my opinion. I was like, no one in the theater was laughing. Like that theater agreed with us that it was not good.
I mean, I haven't seen it since. Why would I? But I remember distinctly it being not funny.
The second Zoolander, I think, was even worse.
I never even saw that.
Anyway, and I think that one was also like panned by critics. So like lots of people agreed. Maybe some people really liked the second Anchorman. But, I wish I could feed the memory of watching Anchorman 2 to the dragon. I think I almost did, because I was like, wait, I couldn't even remember. I was like, wait, did I see that with Charles? But yeah, we did see that together. It's so when they revamp stuff, always a little bit of a worry, but I'm sure
I think
Robin
the next
Hobb,
trilogy is all new characters. So I think she like the story of Fitz ebbs and flows. Yeah, I think the next trilogy chronologically doesn't have Fitz in it at all. I'm pretty sure.
What about Fitz and the Fool?
That's the very last trilogy. That's, you have to read about 3, 6, 9, 10 books before you get to Fitz and the Fool.
Wow.
You get the Live Ship Traders next, which I don't think has Fitz in it as a character or a main point of view character or anything. It's still in the Six Duchies. It's next chronologically, but Fitz is not in it. But then Fitz returns for like my understanding of it is he comes and goes. I try not to read too much about it to avoid spoilers, but I just know that he's not in that one, and I think he's in the one after it, the Tawny Man trilogy.
So it's more like 10 Cloverfield Lane to.
And that was a great sequel.
That was an awesome sequel.
Absolutely.
Oh, man. That was good stuff. Mm-hmm. So, anyway, I think it must be time now, Charles. It must be time to
get
play
that
sweet. Oh, can I? Okay, last thing.
Okay.
And there's a nice thing. Yeah. It's not just attacking Zoolander 2. Zoolander 1, great. But
movie.
I want to say the fan outreach over the Farseer Trilogy and Robin Hobb's work has been very impressive. Like, I know you're not on the gram a lot, Charles, nor are you on the old X that much these days either. We've definitely been less active on social media, but it's X, not really doing what Twitter used to do. And I think, though, Instagram especially, a lot of folks seem to be enjoying our coverage. And, there has been some on X. So thank you to everyone who's
the response in terms of, like, the viewership of these episodes is particularly high, which I'm, like, super happy to see. It's like you said, like, the haters can kind of the criticism can kind of stand out online.
Yeah,
but
haters gonna
haters gonna hate. But these are beloved classics, and it's good to see that the Hobb fandom is going strong. And I really enjoy.
Gonna hob,
Hobber's gonna hob, baby. And
they've been tuning in.
They've been tuning in, and I love it, and I can't wait to get into live ship traders someday. It won't be in the immediate future, but it will be in the relatively near future, I think. I don't want to wait too long, but I also could use a couple books in between, so we'll get there.
From your fantasy.
So, yeah. Thank you all for listening. I mean, the response to these has been really great. Had so much fun talking about them, and I'm glad we can have Robin Hobb in our catalog of episodes. That was an author who I always thought we kind of underserved on the show, so I'm really happy that we're able to bring these episodes into the fold. And who knows what we'll bring in next? Only time will tell when we do Friends Pitching Fantasy again. I think I've got my picks. We're going into Spooktober. So I might pick a couple of spooky books. We'll see. Yet to decide. But we're going to have to do it soon if we're going to read these in time for October. It's already halfway through September, and we got some other commitments to do. So we'll see what we can crank out by the end of October. But maybe it'll be a spook November. Let's keep the spooky season going.
Time, am I right, Charles?
You're right.
Time, it'll get you.
Time, man. It sneaks up on you, boy.
You know what else sneaks up on you? Actually, it does not. It's a sweet outro music.
You gotta drag it out forcibly if it's ever going to make an appearance. So before this,
tried 3 times.
We've tried a bunch of
my
times.
Fault. Yeah, it's my fault.
But it's okay. I was happy to do it. I can't resist. I've always got to indulge the ramblings at the end. It's kind of just a fun thing to do. But I think we're serious this time. I think it's really time to go ahead and get the outro music pumping. As tempting as I am to scramble for another segue, I'm not going to do it because I think we just need to end the show. This
is the podcaster equivalent of no, you hang up.
Yeah, exactly. No, you.
No, you play the sweet outro music.
No, you. But you know what? Another trilogy in the books. Another author covered. This is a good milestone for us. A great point in the show. I'm very happy to be talking about it. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I certainly loved the reread. And I think all it's left to do to pay tribute to this lovely series is to play that sweet outro music.
Let's get that sweet outro music pumping, Charles.
All right, here we go.
Almost attacked another film.
I saw you considering it, but we got it. We got there, guys. Thank you all so much for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today, if you want to support the show or talk to us about your experience with the Fitz trilogy here, the Farseer Trilogy, do that over on the socials. That's on Instagram at the FTF Podcast and at the FTF Podcast with a 1 at the end. And actually, Dylan, I was at a marketing conference just last week, and they had X parentheses Twitter was how they showed it. So
we're in the transitional period.
We're getting.
I'm just telling you. Look, I'm Team Twitter, but I'm telling you, eventually, that parentheses, the parenthetical's going away.
We're chronicling it live on the show. Historians, anthropologists can look back and be like, okay, we know where the public's mind was. We're now at the X parentheses Twitter stage. The denial phase is kind of fading. At some point you have to call it X because the logo's X, but no one knows what you're talking about. So the parentheses Twitter is there at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even further than reaching out on the socials, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, which you can do now over on Spotify, where most of you are listening. It's just 2 clicks over at the top of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast feed, and it helps us so much when you do that. You can also rate and or review on Apple Podcasts, and it's pretty cool when you write us a review. I have to say that, because whenever someone puts anything nice down in one of those reviews, it just puts a smile on my face and presumably on Charles's face as well. But just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for doing that.
just listening, guys. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We greatly appreciate it. You guys are awesome. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.
When I get emails from X, it says X in parentheses, formerly Twitter. So.
And they're doing that on their own.
Over there. Yeah.
Wow.
But that parenthetical skill. All right, I'm going to stop recording.